Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm so excited to announce our very special guest, Julie Lamb. Julie, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. So, everyone, Julie has been investing in real estate since 2009. After investing locally in San Francisco and out of state in single family homes and duplexes, she moved into multifamily investing to scale her investment portfolio. After investing passively herself in a few multifamily syndications, she became very passionate about passive investing and co founded her company, Good Egg Investments, to educate investors about these types of opportunities. Awesome. Well, Julie, thanks so much for being on. Will you take us back in time and give us a picture of who you were before you got into real estate and how it was that you were drawn into this space?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to the time, probably about 2006 in the San Francisco Bay Area. Real estate was on fire and it was very expensive to look at buying a single family home. And luckily for me at the time, I wasn't able to afford to buy anything at that point in time because the prices were so high. I mean, I think even for like a small condo, you were looking at like 750 to a million. Prices have obviously now exceeded that, but this was back then. And then I met my husband in 2008. And so a couple years later, and then all of a sudden we started looking. He was my boyfriend at the time, and we started looking at real estate. And all of a sudden, everything that was so expensive 2.5 years ago was now on sale. It was like a fire sale. And we happened to look in the East Bay, which is across the way from San Francisco, and everything, if anyone listening remembers Oakland and the East Bay back then, you'll remember that everything went from like basically 50% off. And we were looking in 2009 at a time when nobody was buying and there were tumbleweeds in the industry. Real estate agents were hurting for business because nobody was buying. It was hard to get approved for a loan. There were tons of foreclosures going on. And it was a risky time in a way as a new investor to be thinking about getting into real estate for the first time because we didn't really know what we were doing. And, our real estate agent said, well, in 7 years, this property will be worth what it was 2 years ago or a year ago. And we thought, well, that would be great because it was once worth, double what we're paying for it. And we kind of, went off on a whim. It was a 3.5 bedroom condo, 2.5 baths. It was huge. We ended up doing what we now know as house hacking, but back then it was just renting out the extra rooms to help offset our debt payments, which our real estate agent introduced us to that idea. And that kind of was the introduction to real estate in 2009 when I met my husband. And then we ended up buying some more property in the Bay Area in 2009 and 10. But that was kind of the beginning, the early days before I got to where we are now. But yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to circle back on your house hacking venture. So
Yeah.
you were living in a single family house, is that right?
It was a condo. It was a 3.5 bedroom condo.
Oh
Mhm.
wow, okay. And you were like, maybe a little bit younger and you were happy to
Mhm.
share your home with roommates, is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yep. I was in law school at the time. Husband was working. We were hardly ever home, as like late 20s, early 30s often are. And so we thought, sure, if we can live almost for free, why not? And so we did some house hacking, long-term rentals, renters, and then also some Airbnb stuff too. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, my first house, the house that I live in now, I also did the same thing. And I lived with roommates for years and years. And it was just a wonderful way to, I mean, have community, but also get your mortgage paid. So that's
Yes.
awesome. And
Yeah.
so you were buying, you had this condo and then you were buying some single family homes. At what point, what were you doing for work at this time?
I was working in the legal field and I went to law school. I think I was in law school in 2010 to 2011. So I worked on the administrative side in the legal industry and then went to law school for a year and quickly decided that becoming a lawyer was not for me. Too much work and not enough pay was what I concluded. So that's when I continued to work though in the legal industry as I started my family and got married, and started buying a little more real estate. But that's kind of where I was at. I think I was really looking and wanting to do more, but wasn't able to discover the thing that I know now, which is why I'm so passionate about everything that we do, was just really this idea of how do I take the money that I have and put it to work for me so that I could work less or not at all. And that journey took me a while. And if you go out there, anyone who's listening, goes out and talks with financial advisors, you'll know most of them aren't incentivized to tell you about these types of alternative investments. And so you're stuck with stocks and bonds and, mutual funds and this and that, nothing designed to help you retire early or find fire, financial independence, retire early. And we had spent probably a good amount of our 30s looking for that. So, yeah, I wish that I had found me 10 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were working as a lawyer, were you, I mean, I remember you've told me before that you had a long commute, and were you just like dreading going to work every day? What was it like working as a lawyer for you?
Yeah, so was not a lawyer, just a
Oh,
little
oh, right.
correction there. Yeah, I was not a lawyer, worked on the administrative side. But yeah, nonetheless, it was still stressful. I had three kids. I was commuting 2 to 3 hours a day. And it was just a grind. And anyone out there who, listens to, these types of podcasts and thinks, I'm never going to get there. This is impossible. No one lives this life. It's true. It's real. It does happen. If you're intentional about it, you can get to a point where you are living, this life of financial, independence at an early age. But yeah, it was a grind. I never saw my kids. My kids were in daycare until 6 o'clock every day. We'd drop them off at 8 o'clock and they'd be there until 6 every day. It was like the pits. It was the worst. I finally did negotiate with my boss so that I could start earlier, had my husband drop them off so I could start earlier, and then I got to pick them up at 5. So that was a little bit nicer because by the time I got home and got dinner on the table, it was 6, which wasn't too bad. But, that's the life that most people lead. It's not that it's the worst, but it could be better, is the way I saw it. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little bit about how you started transitioning from, single family rentals to more larger properties.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because I live in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and I was buying these single family homes out of state, and it was just a whole lot of work. And I thought, this is just a pain. Like, I need to figure out how to go instead of doing one door or two doors at a time, because I was buying some duplexes. I need to be able to buy like 20 doors or 30 or 100 doors at a time so I can scale and go bigger, farther, faster. Well, as I looked more into multifamily, I realized that there is, if I was going to syndicate, not buy my own, that there's a lot that goes into that. And I looked into buying my own apartment building, even the smaller ones, 10 to 20 units, and just didn't feel like I had the confidence, I guess you could say, to know how to invest in and operate those kinds of deals. And so that's what led me to discovering syndication. After being in the real estate world for a long time, I never knew anything about syndication. And so that's when I discovered syndication and reached out to somebody on Bigger Pockets and said, hey, I see that you're a multifamily syndicator. I have some capital. Would you be interested in partnering? And they were like, well, do you want to be active or passive? And I was like, passive? Is there an option to be passive? Like, because if there is, tell me more about this passive stuff. And that was my introduction to the syndication world. And he had said, in the syndication world, you can either be GP active or you can be LP passive. And I was like, wow, well, this is so interesting. Tell me more. And that's when I went on this journey, probably a 6 to 8 month journey of trying to understand, because it's so complex, this world of syndication, especially if you're new. There's all kinds of terminology, there's legal things that you have to consider, and all kinds of stuff. And if you're going to put 50,000 or 100,000 into a deal, you kind of got to know what you're doing. So I spent a good 6 to 8 months researching before I finally pulled the trigger on my first deal. But I thought that if I wanted to eventually buy my own apartment, that the best way for me to learn, even if it was a smaller one, would be to invest as a passive investor in one of these larger deals so I could understand the metrics behind what are they looking at, what makes a good deal, what markets are they buying in and why. So I could kind of replicate that even if I did it on a smaller scale. And that's exactly what I got. I got education 101 when it comes to what does it mean to buy an apartment and how does it work. And that was how I moved from doing the single family homes, why I did it in the first place was to scale, and how I went about it to do it in a way that was safe. I trusted other people who had a track record better than I trusted myself, having never owned a multifamily apartment building. It's a totally different beast. So if you go from the single family and you want to jump into multifamily, do your homework, because you can get into a lot of trouble if you're not careful. Learn what the pros are doing and then go back and try to do it yourself on your own as an active, GP investor.
For sure. So I think that's all really, there's so much there. Thinking back to those days when you were getting into your first real estate syndication, what was it that was appealing to you? I mean, I know you've touched on this already, but from like a leaving your job standpoint, like what did you see as the pathway to doing that? Can you describe that?
Yeah. So, when you think about leaving your job, it's funny because the first thing that I had heard on a podcast a long time ago was this idea of coming up with your freedom number. I was like, a freedom number? What does that mean? I have no idea what this means. And I remember the person breaking it down, and he basically said, take your expenses and figure out how much income you'll need to have to replace your expenses. And so I did that, and I had an idea of what my expenses were, but now it was time to figure out the income part, like where am I going to replace that income from? And so I kind of did some reverse engineering and thought, okay, well, if I invest X and I'm getting back then a 10% annualized cash on cash return, how much would I have to invest to basically cover my expenses to achieve a place of being able to leave my job? And so this first investment really for me was the beginning, the sort of, I'm going to dip my toe in the water and see kind of, is this right for me? How comfortable is it for me? Do I feel scared, nervous, and all these kinds of things. And it was great. And I loved it. And I got my distributions. In fact, I still remember my first deal that I did. My distribution, we closed in December, and my distribution came early at the end of January. And it was this moment where I looked at my husband on a Saturday night. We were looking at our checking account, because that's what you do when you're married and you have three kids, is on Saturday nights you look at your checking account. And he said, "What is this large deposit that we just got?" And I was like, I have no idea, and I had my single family stuff. So I was like, I don't think it's from any of that. I don't know. And I realized in that moment that it was such an amazing thing to be able to not know where large buckets of money are coming from into your bank account with you not doing any work at all. And that was really when I realized that this is what I needed to do more of. And so that was the first one I did. And I ended up doing, I think, probably like 7 months later. I didn't want to do a second one right away. I wanted to give it some time. But about 7 months later, did my second. Couple months later, did my third. A few months after that, did my fourth, and on I've gone. And now to the point where I'm here talking with you. And since quit my job 2 years ago. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and one that I never thought I would be on. I think most people, when they think about retirement, they think 30 years down the road, or they think if I work really hard, 10 years down the road. But I think if you're strategic and intentional and you network with people, that you can really discover a way that might be a faster path to getting to where you want to be sooner in terms of early retirement.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's so important to think about, how motivated you are to actually make that change, make that retirement happen earlier. And it doesn't have to mean that you're never going to work again or not going to have like a
Yep,
purpose in life, but just to have the freedom to choose what you do with your time instead of being wedded to this job that you have to go to all the time or be online for
exactly.
all the time.
Yep.
So that's really cool. What are some of the lessons that you've learned as a passive investor?
So, one big thing that I would say is make sure that when you invest, you're not investing any more than 10% of your total net worth. I heard this on a podcast once, and I thought that it was really relevant because as great as these syndications are, it's risky. There's a lot of risk. You could invest in the wrong deal, and that's another thing. If you're not investing in a fund and you're just investing in a deal, all your money is tied up in that one deal. So if that one deal goes south, you're in a situation, right? If you can, mitigate that risk by only investing 10% of your net worth into that one deal, all the better. I think another thing to think about is making sure that you're not just so dialed into the deal specifics that you're forgetting about who you're investing with, because anybody can take a good deal and make it go downhill. But the other way around is the more challenging way. How do you take a deal that's not performing or a deal that isn't doing well, and how do you make it do well, right? And so I think sometimes investors, and myself included in the early days, I got so dialed in the deal specifics. And as I've been now doing this for 4 years, I realized that, the importance of the sponsor that you're investing with is so critical. And not so much do they have a track record. Yes, that's important, but really integrity. Do they have integrity? Because at the end of the day, somebody who cares about their reputation and doing the right thing is going to make sure that they do everything in their power to take care of you as a passive investor, versus you invested in a good deal, it went south, and you're dealing with somebody who doesn't have that high level of integrity and they don't take care of you and your money, right? So that's the second thing. I think the last thing I would say is, when you're going into a deal, making sure that you know what your goals are at the onset of the deal is so critical. And being really clear on what your vision is for investing in syndications. So, in other words, like, if cash flow is really important to you, don't invest in a syndication where, yeah, it's an 18% annualized return, but the cash on cash is like 6%, because it's not going to move the needle in the direction that you need to. Is it passive investment, like money coming in? Yes, but 6% isn't going to get you to where you want to go. So I think being really clear on the onset about where it is what is your ideal life? Where do you want to be in terms of, your financial investments? How do you want to leverage that to get where you want to go in the next year, 2, 3 years? And really like reverse engineering that and figuring out what type of investments might be the right fit based on what your goals are. So, yeah.
For sure. I think there's a lot there, and very good, excellent words of wisdom from Julie. So, Julie, anything else you would like to leave our listeners who are maybe looking to do what you did, which is leave their high paying careers potentially to not have to be able to do that same job every single day?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say, especially for any women out there listening, is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Because I think as women, we're so afraid in terms of like our finances to make the wrong investment choice, lose our investment money, have our kids think the worst of us, have our husbands say, "See, I told you so." And I think what happens is it stops us from really moving forward, and it's the mistakes that we need to be able to learn how to run, right? As a child, when you learned how to walk, you did so because you made mistakes along the way. And so I would just say that, be open to making those mistakes, because those mistakes are the things that are going to help you have success later on.
Awesome. Great words of wisdom again. Well, Julie, thank you so much for taking some time to come on the show. Would you please give the listeners a way to get in contact with you and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So if anybody wants to talk about passive investing, or, my journey or resources or anything like that, would love to chat with you. You can email me at julie@goodegginvestments.com. We also have our own podcast. It's the Life and Money Show. So definitely check us out there as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, I hope you all take some time to reach out to Julie. She's just a wealth of experience and knowledge, and happy to talk to you. So thanks so much, Julie. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me on.